Hello and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dadley Boyz of WhatCulture, Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown, the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT, pay-per-views, we have interviews, roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But as I said, joined by Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick. And gents, we are gathered here today to talk about things that make Vince McMahon mad. And the jumping off point for this is, of course, the recent reports that he was furious after seeing Brody Lee's sort of impersonation of him on AEW Dynamite this week. Michael Sidgwick, as a paid AEW shill, what did you make of the thing that Brody Lee did and of Vince's reaction to it all?
Before I give you my personal take and my opinion on it, I just want to laugh, just heartily, at the disproportionate response between some WWE fans and how much they hated it compared to what actually the performer behind Brody Lee went through in WWE, right? Fair enough, yes, he was compensated very well for his time and all the rest of it, but Vince McMahon robbed that dude of years and years of his prime physical prime as a professional wrestler because he couldn't do a southern accent as if that was really, really important. It wasn't as if he wasn't over or couldn't get over. In 2017, he was bloody over. In 2014, his work in the Shield Wyatt six-mans was absolutely incredible. He brought huge health to the tag team division in those amazing matches with the Usos. He was very much a talent who was underutilized, right? In being unable to do a Southern American US States accent, his career was gone because he couldn't do this one foible that Vince McMahon somehow deemed it absolutely essential that he do, right? Compare that with a 2 minutes skit on TV. A 2 minutes skit on TV, that's essentially a parody of a guy, and then it was quite accurate by so many different stories. Oh, AEW can't do this. They can't do this. Like, piss off, man. Compare what the two entities have done to each other, the two parties have done to each other. As for the skit itself, I thought it was a nice tethering to reality of what the Dark Order is. It's an evil corporation, stable. This is what power does to people. They kick the cat and it goes all the way down the chain. That's why we are the brown-beaten workers. That's why rich men win in capitalism. I thought it was a neat idea with which to get this over as an evil corporation, which doubled as a nice dig. It probably did annoy Vince McMahon because he's got no sense of humor about himself. Or if he did years ago when he used to piss himself on telly, that feels like a different bloke. Hamflett, what did you think of it as a paid AEW hater?
Well, as we said on the review, really, I welcomed it as a bit of something to laugh at and something to talk about. It was far from the sharpest barb in WWE's direction anyway. And I'm with you on punching up as well, especially go to Vince McMahon. This is very different than if Chris Jericho was to earnestly mock somebody coming to AEW for their old character on television. You know, he used that as a heel in his promo against Matt Hardy before he was vanquished. But if he was doing that and he was giving a guy grief in a way that John Cena does for having a rubbish character or an old gimmick, that would be very different because so much of that was out with the performer's hands. But this is mocking the foibles of a weird billionaire that a sizable number of these AEW wrestlers have experienced one way or another. Some of them, in the case of Brody Lee, as Cedric points out, has kind of had his prime years used and abused by him. Cody was somebody that no longer wanted that to happen, so went elsewhere. Chris Jericho's done absolutely fine by him and was probably enjoys the crack. Maybe wouldn't be so keen to play that character himself because it wouldn't feel true. Like, Chris Jericho did absolutely fine by Vince McMahon, despite all the things that Vince did to him. He still did fine by Vince McMahon. So I think it's always all about context, and it was bang right in this particular incident. I don't think it particularly applies very well to the Dark Order storyline. I don't have high hopes for that. I don't have high hopes for it as an angle or as a character trait, but as a little gag on an evening on Dynamite, I quite liked it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a nice little nod, as you mentioned, to the past. We all know about Vince McMahon and his tendency to overreact to certain situations. WWE fans who are watching AEW like those sorts of shots at WWE. And, I like both shows, but I can understand why they might like to take these, slight digs at WWE because this is for fans who've just grown so tired of WWE's product as a result of Vince McMahon. And let's be honest, to sort of expand this out a little bit more, this is by no means the first time that Vince McMahon has completely overreacted to something like this. The reports coming out from Dave Meltzer on Wrestling Observer Radio is that he was absolutely apoplectic at this slight at him. But Michael Hamflett, this is not the first time he's got mad about something.
So I would like to bring up something that you say, Wilborn, when we are gathered here today, because Vince McMahon hatred of pronouns, pal, is something that I just love. I love the idea that Vince McMahon, the billionaire wrestling promoter, is ultimately such a carny salesman hick at heart that when he lets his announcers, when he hears his announcers use the words like he or I or anything like that in reference to a wrestler or a promo, he gets so furious down that headset, or he chews them out backstage because they must say their name all the time. I like that it highlights that he has such little respect for his audience, or such panic that the channel changer won't stay put unless they hear that tonight Stone Cold Steve Austin is going to face The Rock, not last week I faced him, because the audience is so stupid to understand that. It's one of those brilliant quirks that obviously Bruce Pritchard was able to sell t-shirts off the back of, because it was something that he remembers having to listen to when he was in that browbeaten gorilla position, which is where he finds himself back there now. It's just the idea that Vince exists in his own world, that pronouns can be outlawed, is exactly why AEW can get away with jokes at his expense. It makes you think about the things that they're going to put in segments in the weeks to come, of like Luke Harper, or Brody Lee as he's now known, like calling every Dark Order member by name over and over again to the point of insanity because he's taken on that particular character trait of him. It puts you in mind of what it must be like to work under him, and particularly if you're having a bad time working under him, why that's an unenviable position to be in when it's theoretically every wrestler's dream.
It's one of those things, the pronouns, that it's an annoying quirk that maybe at one point it was quite endearing, but I was writing an article in which the whole pronouns thing was an entry in a list. So in order to research it, bloody work I do for you, man. In order to research it, I counted literally how many times Michael Cole, I think it was a match between Sheamus and Roman Reigns for whatever reason, because I think they've both got like various, like a lot of nicknames, Sheamus in particular. I counted the amount of times that instead of just saying he, when it was immediately obvious that he was in reference to, the amount of times that they instead said the Great White or Sheamus or Roman Reigns or the big dog's got momentum, the Great White's going to have to create separation. And the more you hear it, the more farcical it becomes. And as a human being, which I'm not convinced Vince McMahon is, like, as a human being with a threshold for getting like irritated, which is very, very low, admittedly, I was just going, how are you not driving yourself insane by repeatedly insisting on nicknames, no pronouns, pal? No. Why? I'm not that thick. Like, I'm not. Like, sometimes I am.
British comedy institution, the day to day, when they like employ a life coach and he just picks up every time the office drone says and then he just bullies him to the point of him having to leave the job altogether and do something else. That's literally Vince McMahon to half the commentators ever worked for him. Anytime that somebody says he, you just have Vince McMahon in your head for he. Like, it chased Mick Foley out of doing that job for a living, and countless others since.
Am I right in thinking Vince McMahon was behind the Who character?
To just steal the Who's on First bit from, what was it, 30s, 40s American comedy, because that's his frame of reference and has remained that way ever since.
Who?
No, Who?
Ridiculous. But this can kind of be...
No, not Who.
This could sort of be extended out, though, into the wider language of wrestling, because we all know there is a list of banned words within WWE. Isn't that right, Hamflett?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the wrestling thing seems to have been lifted, but I think it was 4 or 5 years ago where that list did the rounds on the internet. And the thing is, it's Vince McMahon, so it changes with the weather. So it's a sort of thing whereby when there was a period where when somebody would say belt, like the next day on the internet, there would be an internet gasp. Like, oh, he said belt. Somebody's getting fired in the morning, because you just happen to know that was one of Vince's. CM Punk's pipe bomb was particularly smart in the fact that it knew that he was directing it at a particular section of the fan base, and he was just going through that list and ticking them off. It was like, never talk about John Laurinaitis, never mention that Triple H and Stephanie are part of the family, never say wrestling, never bring up Ring of Honor, don't look at the hard camera, don't talk about Colt Cabana, he works somewhere else. It was able to play on the fact that people knew he had all these weird insecurities about certain words and phrases getting out there.
And the funny byproduct of that is, look how over it got him. Look at how over it got him. Oh my God, he's saying everything that's wrong with this company. It must be great because this company, therefore, must be absolutely rubbish. Yeah, like, there was, as Hamlet says, like the change with the weather. I'm sure, like last year, maybe it was, or maybe 2 years ago, he just up and decided that he hated the word tournament, and it must be henceforth known as an eliminator. What? Like, his synonyms are absolutely insane. Like, I'll just never grasp it. It's consistent with the idea that he doesn't like to be reminded of professional wrestling in his guise as a professional wrestling promoter. It's just so odd. It's just so odd. And yet again, it's the same with the pronouns and the lack thereof and the banning of them on WWE TV. There's a gag in Friends, I think it is, where Joey Tribbiani is trying to write a letter of some sort, but he's worried about how thick he is. So the gag is that he just goes on the synonyms on like the word process and document, to the point where a lot of the synonyms are like they're not contextually correct, and the joke is he's an idiot. And that same sensation sometimes pervades WWE program, where the amount of changes that they insist upon away from the usual lexicon of professional wrestling, just the more just patently fake and distracting it becomes, to the point of complete and utter parody.
I'm doing a list at the moment about wrestlers accidentally injuring themselves, and your mind will no doubt turn to Vince McMahon when I mention that, for his turn at the 2005 Royal Rumble match. I think out of everything that Vince McMahon has gotten mad at, I would have paid good money to have been backstage when Batista and John Cena botched the ending of the 2005 Royal Rumble. It's folklore, isn't it? That freak out, Michael Sidgwick.
Yeah, it's absolutely hilarious, because this is where Vince McMahon's temper undoes him. You hear the words "blown a gasket" and instantly your mind is transported to Vince McMahon, because what you had there was, fair enough, if cooler heads had prevailed, maybe this match you wouldn't have booked, because you didn't want to have either one of these guys lose ahead of WrestleMania. But if he had just waited a goddamn second, 10 seconds to collect his thoughts, he realized, I've just accidentally stumbled upon gold here. We've inadvertently replicated the 1994 Rumble finish. You can, if they had a practice that, particularly John Cena, because he was useless, if they had a practice that a million times, they would never have got the timing so goddamn perfect on that double elimination. If you had to wait 10, 15 seconds, I know it's easy enough to say it in retrospect, but if they had just waited, they could have realized, oh, hang on, that's no way out. That's no way out. Pay-per-view main event sorted. We've just got a buy rate from a botch. But instead, no, the red mist descended. He waddled out so furious at this botch and tore both his quads. One of the greatest moments of my life, that.
So the story goes, doesn't it, that he tore one quad, but he was still so furious and pissed off that he wouldn't take help to the back. So he's trying to walk to the back and walk backstage on one torn quad. So naturally, leans too heavy on there and tears the other one. Like that was a making of his own fury. And Cedric makes a point, right? So that particular finish, obviously the botch, if you watch it back now, it's brilliant because it honestly doesn't look like a botch. It's one that they totally could have gotten away with. And yes, that bit of it, we've all got a degree in hindsight and we could all say, here's the things you could have done differently. But you're not even asking Vince McMahon to take like 5 minutes to make his mind up. You're asking him to take 5 seconds, not to stand up from where he was in Gorilla and throw something to the ground and storm straight out there. It would have taken hardly any time of reflection whatsoever to just stop and think. But He's a guy that when he doesn't want to do that is like physically incapable of that. It's something that he acts so incredibly on impulse, like in a way that none of us could possibly reconcile, that if you asked him, why don't you take 25, 30 seconds to just think about it, his brain would explode. He wouldn't understand. I've got to deal with this right now, pal. Like that's the only way he knows to fix things like that.
Another thing he doesn't like much, Michael Hamflett, is mentioning the opposition. Why is that?
Because he just wants all of wrestling to be thought of as WWE. There is a thing where if you're watching a sporting event where there appears to be a bit of a grapple or a bit of a fight between two competitors, a commentator that has no knowledge of wrestling, he won't even say WWE. The commentator will say something like, "Oh, that looks like some WWF there." Like he's for the longest time wanted the byword of anyone physically engaging with somebody else to be WWF or WWE. So in his mind, wrestling as an art form doesn't really exist outside of his product. He always said it competed with the Sopranos. It doesn't compete with WCW or ECW, which is farcical because it could never compete with the Sopranos on its best day. But it's just another part of his insular and myopic view on how everything should be done his way and no other way. The idea in 1995 of Eric Bischoff to bring up WWE wasn't just to bring them up and try and make them look bigger, because companies have done that before and it's gone badly for them. When TNA used to do it, it made them look small time because it just felt like they were in the shadow of WWE. The idea of Bischoff's was to just be the total opposite. So if WWF was looking a little bit stoic and a little bit out of date, then WCW would be forward thinking and would be brave and would be ballsy and wouldn't mind giving away results because we're live, we're not taped. That was the crucial difference. It wasn't just acknowledging the opposition for the sake of it. Vince McMahon, in response, when he finally did think, right, okay, I've got to act against type and acknowledge the opposition, had two old codgers play Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man, when on his roster at the time, he didn't have anyone that could draw like Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man. So the few times he would try it, he fundamentally misunderstood it. So even given the opportunity to mention the opposition, he didn't really do a very good job of it. So I can kind of understand why he sort of remained away from it. But I just think it's something else that plays into this, like one way, and it's got to be his way or no way of looking at everything, including the business, which I genuinely think it's a bit like the Premier League in 1992. I'm pretty sure he thinks he invented it in 1985 sometimes.
Sidge, what do you make of him? Because he was furious when he saw some WWE wrestlers just tweet about AEW launching.
Yeah, there was that story as well. I think it was Sami Zayn in one of those years from now, they'll write books about 2019. I'm convinced about this. Like just some of the strange match graphics or segment graphics that you remember that will blow your mind. Wilborn, I'm going to blow your mind right now. Can you remember Sami Zayn and the electric chair?
Yes.
Yes. 2019 is full of these absolutely incredible moments. It's going to be the electric chair. So Sami Zayn sat in this electric chair. This was like 5 months before he managed Mojo Rawley for about a week, which is also absolutely insane. What an insane career Sami Zayn and both Kevin Owens have had in particular. Just what an absolute waste. But regardless, there was he said something to the effect of, would you rather I talked about AEW? And he did that. And apparently just went apoplectic, but they didn't know if they were working the boys or like working the Dirt's brother, which is such an asinine thing. Like, what's such insider baseball that, like, who would care about getting worked about that or regardless, but he just hates it. Again, as Hamflett's eloquently said, there's this mentality that he has that he wants WWE to be Hoover. And as he points out, that it's kind of not worked because it's badly receded from mainstream relevance because it's WWF. It's like, oh, it looks like a Royal Rumble here. It's never like, oh, it looks like stomping grounds out here. It looks like, Great Balls of Fire.
Why is he
Never going to
so
be that.
averse?
It was Royal Bloody Rumble.
Why is he so averse to mentioning, AJ Styles has passed in TNA? Because it's not like they're a legitimate threat anymore.
I mean,
Or Sting, for example.
It's just he doesn't deem anything beyond his bubble prestigious enough to promote it. And there's also probably the idea of, oh, if we've hired this fantastic talent and he was doing did so many great matches in Japan, then that maybe will compel the WWE fan to go, oh, well, I must check out New Japan Pro Wrestling. Hilariously, with AJ Styles, they did mention the nebulous scene of promotions just simply entitled Japan. Apparently, did you know that AJ Styles captured initially the IWGP Heavyweight Championship from Goto. It's never held. Hiroki Goto's never held it. I honestly think we were like, feed me a line, feed me a champion who we got it from, and someone just played a rib or who never got it but was so close, and it's probably really sad that he didn't. Goto.
I just misread the notes. He just said, "Just get me a go-to Japanese wrestler." I think it's. So in some cases, it's not even about hatred and emotion. It's about complete ignorance. It always makes me think Scott Hall just being ahead of the game and being told he doesn't really watch films, and he's just like, well, I'll just rip off Scarface then. I love it. Razor Ramon, what an invention. It's like he's just not mindful of this huge blockbuster from 2 years earlier.
Madness. Now, it would be wrong of us to deal with a topic like things that make Vince McMahon mad without mentioning the most obvious thing of all. Sneezing and, to a certain extent, nodding. Michael Hamflet, over to you.
Bodily functions, man. So Paul Heyman, of course, I believe it was Paul Heyman, gave this story to the world that Vince McMahon hated sneezing because it was the one thing he felt he didn't have control over. And doesn't that apply to everything else we've discussed here? Like, it's one thing that, I mean, what a time in the world to not like germs, to be a germaphobe. Maybe he's onto something there, but it's not about germs, is it? Because he doesn't know who's making his steak wrap with ketchup, so he's going to catch germs from that. It's about the fact that for just a split second, his body has power over him that he can't do anything about. And that's the magic thing about the sneezing for me. It's like, it's all well and good that you don't want a lot of people coming into work sick, but it's quite another when you resent them, because how could they not control that involuntary spasm that your body and face makes when you sneeze? Because he's figured out a way to do it. Like this, that's what I like about it, is that he's thinking, well, the 1 or 2 times it gets me, it's not like those other sneezes that I have total control over.
Sorry, go on.
Well, just before we move on, Sige, what I really like as well, not just about the sneezing thing, more arguably about the nodding thing, is the story that goes with it, akin to that, whereby I think Stephanie told a writer or something, don't nod. He hates nodding because he hates yes men. And this is a man who surrounds himself with yes men.
I mean, ultimately, the thing about Vince McMahon is that if you take every single defining characteristics and the characteristics that undermine the characteristics, it's just a walking paradox. Endlessly fascinating, completely. Like, I love the man, and I hate him. I resent how thick he thinks I am. I can't honestly make it through 20 to 25 minutes of Monday Night Raw, even if the wrestling is really good, even if the promos are good, even if they've planted, as Paul Heyman has taken to doing, of putting a mystery or a story beat in segment 1 that you've been expected will pay off in like the final segment. So like a show long hook. I'm like, all right, okay, I'm interested. It's going to be a good match. There's a decent story involved in Raw. Just the sheer presentation of what he asks his commentators to do. Within 25 minutes, I just hate it, and I hate him. And then I'll go back and watch literally 10 seconds of him doing a GIF in 1998 and just think, you're the absolute boy. I absolutely love you. But the sneezing thing is just so odd, because if you take his famous hatred of sneezing and realistically the lack of control that it sort of suggests, compare it with his love of bodily fluids and his hatred of losing, you could go up to Vince McMahon and go, have a piss right now. Go on, have a piss right now. I don't think you can. He would ultimately be challenged into just having a piss on command because he hates the idea that he's not in control. If he's truly in control of his body, Vince McMahon, if you're actually watching this podcast, and I don't think you are, but if you are, dare you to have a piss right now and film it. And if you can't, then you're a failure because you can't control your own body.
Cedric, man, there's a lot of people with a lot of time in their hands. You've just kicked off like the grossest ice bucket challenge thing ever. There's gonna be people piss tagging around the world now.
God damn it, pal! I should be able to piss. It's my own cock. God damn it!
I think we'll leave it there on that note. Let us know your thoughts on the numerous other things that makes Vince McMahon mad in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. You can let us know your thoughts on Twitter as well, at WhatCulture WWE. You can follow us all on Twitter, in fact. I'm trying to get around the pronouns game here. You can follow him at
Michael Hamflet.
And you can follow him at
at Sidgwick.
And you can follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCulture WWE, as I said. This has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boyz. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.